What's up, folks? MC in the house. So, we're going to talk today about the tyranny not being forced on us by government, but by our fellow citizens, our fellow supposed, brothers and sisters of our societies and communities and civilization at large. A topic or a perspective that people seem to be confused about, it seems to remain ambiguous in people's minds, is how could anybody who, in a general sense, seems normal for all intents and purposes, how could they enact any sort of malicious or at least damaging negative impact on other people with seemingly no reason to do so? Why? How could members of the government, members of certain bodies of influence that are, escalated now more than ever, how could they do things that they knowingly would understand to be damaging to the people they are doing them to? And I think, in a general sense, most people, and it has to do with maybe part naivete, part ignorance, part weakness, certain aversions to violence and conflict that reside in the individual. For whatever reason, they think that these people, these disconnected people, would not either have zero problem enacting and inflicting pain and discomfort on other people for their own benefit, or they don't understand that that many people, dare I say the majority of the population, subscribes to this latter condition, or this latter, set of attributes, personality attributes, which is they would do whatever the authority tells them to do. You see, one of the things that happened successfully through the propaganda being spread at the start of this nonsense was the messaging was not only about the severity of what it is we were facing, but also the underlying sort of seeds of contempt being installed on the viewers of this propaganda to start resenting those people around them, the people in their very communities, that were not abiding by the same messaging. So you had, I remember, the former, now disgraced former governor of New York, Cuomo, talking about how New Yorkers were tough and they would handle their neighbors, and they would keep them in check about following social distancing guidelines, et cetera, and how it was taken as this almost trying to be I guess just humorous, entertaining, rhetoric. But what it actually was installing this idea, this notion in the viewer, the people who were susceptible, that this is something appropriate for you to do. This is something that good people would do. When it comes to human nature and how just seemingly, what people would call evil, how evil people could be, maybe the majority of society has lived so disconnected from reality, and they've become so comfortable in their bubbles that they don't realize the way humans work. I would ask that you guys take a couple of minutes, do a Google search on something called the Milgram experiment, Milgram. And it was an experiment, a social psychological experiment done, I believe in Yale or Princeton, probably, I think Yale, in the 60s. And basically the setup of it was the researcher, Milgram, Dr. Milgram, I don't know his first name, set up an experiment whereby you had the experimenter, right, the person facilitating the exercise. You had the participant in the exercise who was sort of playing a role unbeknownst to him, and he was labeled in the terminology of the experiment as the teacher, I believe. And then you had a person who was in another room, hidden, disconnected, called the learner. And the way that the experiment was conducted, was that the experimenter would ask the learner a question, and if the learner was supposed to, or if the learner had gotten the answer wrong to the question asked, the teacher, the actual participant, would have to elicit a shock to the learner, basically punishing them for getting the question wrong. And what would happen is, obviously, the learner who was experiencing these shocks, it was all a hoax. There was no person experiencing anything. But they would have a simulated response to these shocks. And I don't know the mechanics of it. The experimenter, or rather the teacher, presses a button and the guy in the other room yells and acts like he's in pain. And they found the overwhelming majority of people not only complied completely with instructions, but they also, in an escalation, a simulated escalation of electrically shocking the people in the other room, they were very willing to use levels of electricity that would have potentially killed the people in the other room. They were just following orders. They were just following orders. And this was an experiment that was done in the 60s. And another one, you guys could look at the Stanford prison experiment, which I believe was done in the 70s by a Lombardo. I actually think they made a movie about the Stanford prison experiment. And all of these experiments, all they do is just illustrate how human nature is not as devoid of this sort of cold complacency that we think it is. People will follow orders. Okay, so one of the things that I explain to my coaching students is, if an individual does not know who he is, if he doesn't know who he is, how does he know who he's supposed to be in situations of stress and pressure? If you don't know where you're supposed to be, how do you ever know if you're lost? Which is why rituals that allow an individual to sort of build a relationship with himself need to be given a level of loyalty and commitment. And it's to preserve, ironically, your humanity. The more you understand yourself as an individual, the more of a value you are to any larger community. That's just the way it is, the way it'll always be. One of the things that they do propaganda-wise, to when we are, at a war, at war with another people or another country, the first thing the messaging starts to do is to dehumanize those other people. Those people aren't like us. Those people are, subhuman. These people don't deserve your empathy, certainly not your sympathy or anything of that nature. It's part of recruiting everybody to collectively disconnect that part of interacting with other people that compels us to do, to follow the golden rule, if you would, treat them the way you would want to be treated. Well, you don't have to treat people that way if they're not human, if they deserve no such exception. So why is it that people are so easily and readily turning on their neighbors? Because it's human nature to do that. And right now, at a larger scale than I would argue the history of mankind, people have no purpose. People are being told by third parties what it is they're supposed to be doing with their lives. As a result of that, they're wandering around, always looking to feel better, never knowing quite what to do to be better. People want to experience pleasure. They don't want to experience accomplishment. It's what we have been slowly sort of sold into believing is virtuous. Right now, there is going to be an escalation of frustration amongst individuals. And I've been saying this for some time now, certainly over a year into this. There is going to become a level of escalation whereby people in their day-to-day life are going to become so frustrated and uncomfortable they can no longer go along with the collective messaging that everybody was willing to go along with in the beginning. I'm not here to argue vaccines or different shots and masks, and I will make other videos that argue that. The purpose of this video is just to get you guys to understand that whatever positions you have, make sure they weren't given to you by somebody who has absolutely no interest in the well-being of you and the people you care about. Whatever positions you're ready to argue with your neighbors over, make sure that position was acquired by a process of rational thinking, by a process of investigation and contemplation, even discussion and debate with people you care about and trust. These are the things that are supposed to represent the process of how we know who we are. The last thing I would add is you need to maintain a minimum level of sort of malleability. Tunnel vision doesn't help anybody. Tunnel vision does nothing but allow the people who are propagandizing others, if they can get these people to not only succumb to the propaganda, but to also experience this sort of binary tunnel vision and commitment to those positions that they've given them, that is how they build a momentum toward taking over. And, it's a pretty dire statement, the whole, if you keep doing this is how they take over. But, there's historical precedent where that's concerned, and you guys, some of you guys keep thinking, the government would never do that. And, this would never happen. And just what's the big deal? Just go along with what they say. Just listen, I don't care if you go along with what they say. Just make sure you're going along with it because what they're saying makes sense, not just because they're saying it. I appreciate you guys. You guys got to get out and move. Movement is mandatory. Get your children out there moving. Some of you guys are allowing your children to go through some stuff, and I'll make another video about that. You're allowing your children to go through some stuff, and your head's just in the fucking sand about it. And I'm not going to get into that too deep now, but what I will say is, with what your children are being subjected to these days, most children are being subjected to these days, at least do them the service of investing in them when they're home. Get them out there moving, get them exercising. You don't know what exercise to do? Fucking YouTube it, man. Like, there's too much information out there to not be powerful these days. All right? I'm not going to ramble on. I appreciate you guys. Talk to you soon.